Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Your Handmade Business Television, our weekly series dedicated to helping you navigate all things #maker life. I am Isaac Watson, and this lovely lady next to me is Sharon Fain. We have a little too much fun together sometimes, but
was not as much fun with you without you last week, Isaac. I'm sorry.
Sorry I couldn't make it. I'm sorry I couldn't make it. That was a bummer.
So lonely.
So we are the directors of Academy of Handmade. For anybody who's new and has not joined us before, we are a supportive community for makers. We offer a signature program called Jumpstart Your Handmade Business. And each week on YHB TV, we tackle a topic that we think gets a little bit deeper into what's really going on in your business. We also have a podcast and a newsletter and all kinds of great stuff. Facebook group, can't forget the Facebook group. That we hope you will join if you are not already part of that. So this week we're doing things a little bit differently. Normally we pick a topic and then run with it for each episode. This week we're going for Ask Us Anything. Let's do a grab bag of questions. We've been having a lot of great conversations in our Facebook group, and we figured since there were 5 Thursdays in March, maybe the 5th Thursday of every month, or maybe every time there's a 5th Thursday, we do a grab bag. There we go. Anyway, so yeah, we'll get into that in just a second. If you are just joining us, please introduce yourselves in the chat. If you're on Facebook watching along, thank you. We appreciate that. It's a little more fun over here on Crowdcast, though, because you get to chat with us live and ask your questions. If any of you have burning questions, use the Ask a Question button to ask that, and we will try to get to everything today. That's funny because on my screen you're pointing to not the right area.
It doesn't even matter because when we look at it, the recorded version has us in like totally different, like we're stacked on top.
That's right, we're stacked on top of each other.
So it would still be down, I guess.
It's below us. We know that much. Anyway, so while everybody gets here, Sharon, how are you? What's new?
Good. Doing pretty good. I've been on my own craft adventure lately, trying to do some natural dyeing. And so I've been picking feral flowers in the neighborhood. So watch out, neighbors. If your lawn is overgrown, gonna come by on the dog walks and pick stuff from your yard.
Nice. Have you actually dyed anything yet, or are you still in the process?
No, I have a freezer full of avocado pits right now and skins, getting ready for that. And then I just have baggies full of different flowers right now. So
nice. That sounds fun. I was in Amsterdam last week, which was fun. I was there for mostly business, but that was exciting. I went to the Stedelijk Museum, which is the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art there.
Okay.
And it was really fun to see, because I studied graphic design, it was like a living art history class, because their collection was very, like, the way they arranged it, in the way they had it on view was chronological, so you could see everything in context. And so it was like walking through an art history book. It was really, really cool. And I was re-inspired by Mondrian and Kandinsky and all of the like Bauhaus and modernist people that I know and love from my good old college days. And so that was very kind of creatively refreshing for me. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. Are we ready to get into some of the questions?
Yeah. Let's answer some questions.
Make sure if you have any questions to submit them so we get to them and we don't miss them.
Yeah, our brains are open books right now. Or something.
Does that mean there's like blank pages in there? A lot of room up here, guys. It's an empty vessel.
Whatever.
Okay, so it looks like Don had a question. Actually, Don had a couple questions that we'll get to. in the Facebook group, and she asked, how long should my wholesale pitch be and what info should I include in it? So I'm going to assume that Dawn is asking for the email pitch here, that she's contacting stores via email. Obviously, you can also contact stores like when you see them, when you go in, or if you're at a trade show face to face. That's also, I guess, a pitch time. But probably, I'm going to guess the most common way is that you would want to email them. Correct? Is this what you're saying to, Isaac?
Yep.
Okay. You want to take this, Isaac?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple things you should do. First of all, it needs to be short and sweet, because nobody wants to read an essay in their inbox from someone that they may have never met before. So keep it concise. I also think that probably the most important thing to do is to include why your work is special or different from other work that might be out there, as well as why you think it's a good fit for their shop. And I think the key strategy behind that is that it shows that you have done your research. And the added benefit is that if you always make sure you include that in the email, then that will also ensure that you do your research before you email them, because that is like the biggest thing that I hear from shop owners time and time again, is that they get these pitches from people who very obviously have never even looked at their website or or visited their store to see what kinds of products they sell. So why is your work special and different? And why do you think it's a good fit for their shop? And you might also kind of include why, like the type of person that typically likes to buy your work. It could help the shop owner identify who, like, whether their typical customers match with yours, things like that. Do you have any other ideas on that?
Yeah, so I mean, we talked about this a little when we talked about the ideal wholesale customer, which you weren't on. You abandoned me for Amsterdam. And
I didn't tell you about that dinner. That dinner was insanely long.
Isaac was at the longest dinner in the world, which
like
I guess
long.
a typical Dutch dinner, I guess, is like very, very slow. Anyways, so we talked about when you are, I think this is when we talked about ideal wholesale customer, is that you want to call out your line, that there might be specific products in your line that are right for a certain store, but like your whole line isn't necessarily right for a certain store. So sometimes you should think in terms of not like, does my whole line equal this whole store? Would this be a perfect fit? It's more just like there's sometimes, you might sell these very specific things and that they will only go and, this could ever go in a store like that. So I would say that, right? Like if you have a line of jewelry, right? There's just different kinds of jewelry that you're selling, but say you sell state-shaped necklaces, right? And that this is a shop that, is some sort of like tourist kind of shop. And, let's say it's like in Texas or something. And that they would enjoy one of your Texas, shaped necklaces, specifically call that out then, right? Like say that, the other stuff that you're selling might not work in this shop, but this shop, because it's, catering towards tourists, might appreciate the Texas necklace or whatever. So think about it in that sort of context of what are the specific things in your line, and say like, so that the person isn't like overwhelmed by like going into your catalog. I mean, obviously there's some makers where they're only selling really one kind of thing, so it's very obvious what you're getting into. But there's some makers that have a pretty diverse line, and so you want to call out the specific products.
For sure.
I mean, not all of the products, but like a couple that you think would be particularly good for their shop.
Mm-hmm. All right, Dawn, I hope that helps. Let's go into the next question. This is from Beth, and I'm going to let you take this one. Beth says, I have several questions about scaling a handmade business, starting with what is involved in finding and hiring a production company to start making your quote unquote handmade jewelry.
Okay, so she said production company. So I think when you say something like that, I forget, we kind of went into this with her in the Facebook group, but like every like that, right? So that means different things for certain kinds of jewelry, certain kinds of products, right? Production company. So there's everything from, say you make cosmetics and you are doing the blend of stuff yourself, but you have outsourced it to, somebody else to make, the products, and then they come back to you, right? That could be your if you're making jewelry, it could be anything from like you have a CNC machine, do some of the parts for you, and it comes back to you and you're assembling that, right? Like, so there is a lot of different ways that this could work for everyone. Some lines have it where they're having everything sort of go out and come back to them and just package it up and sell it. Others are just having certain aspects of their line or certain aspects of certain products, or they're still rapidly hand making and doing a lot of stuff for somebody, doing that for their line and charging more for the handmade stuff. So all that to say, I want to say that there's like a million different ways to do this, basically. So when you ask it, I'm going to try to be as specific and general as possible for the situation. One thing that we talk about is making sure that you're set up to make the leap, right? That you already know your pricing, you already know what your sales are going to be about, so that, right, because the idea of manufacturing is you're scaling up, but if you don't see the market demand for that, or the demand for the kind of scaling you have to do, right? So sometimes when you go do manufacturing, you're talking about, tens or hundreds of thousands of units versus maybe what you were doing before is hundreds of units, and you just need to get into thousands, not, hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands. So make sure you understand what the kind of scaling is and if that's sustainable for you. So basically, like, everything needs to be dialed in really well. One of the things we suggest to get dialed in and make sure that you're ready for these kinds of leaps and figure that out is going through our Jumpstart program. We have lots of ways to help you through that process. We have tons of resources in our resource library. Another thing to think about as well in this whole process is our mastermind that we did too, as well. Coming up, we're going to be doing that again. So those are two programs that we offer that could help you. Another thing to think about in scaling and what's involved in hiring and all of that is sometimes it's easier to bring in production help first versus hiring another company to manufacture. And when I say bring in, that doesn't necessarily mean someone has to come into your house and do something. That could just mean, they're in your company versus outside of your company. So it could be, a person who is set up to, do some finishing work, like putting on jump rings or whatnot in your business, and you give them all the supplies and you tell them, here's how much I will pay you when this is done. And then they come back to you with everything completed and you just pay them. So there's things like that to sort of like get your feet wet into scaling. And then there's also thinking about what kinds of things that you're having them do. There's the assembly versus actually producing the pieces, kind of like we said. Everything from having cast made, things like that. There's a lot of different ways to think about those sorts of scales. So I would still even say that if you're hiring a production company to like cut out parts of your pieces or do things like that, and they're just coming back to you and you're still involved in that process, I would say that a lot of that would still be considered handmade at some level. So thinking about those changes. Do you have anything to add, Isaac?
I did. I had something like 30 seconds ago, and now I can't remember what it was. Oh, well, I remember that Beth had mentioned, I think, forming her own ear wires, and that there was some assembly. And I think the way she described that seemed more like, bringing in help, like you just described, could be more beneficial from the outset. But she was interested in getting into casting, which is definitely a an outside vendor. And so in that world, I would recommend, I feel like this one comes up all the time on YHB TV. There are like 3 podcast episodes that I've done last year that like constantly come up and we constantly recommend. But it's the episode with Jen Crow from Jen Crow Studio. And she talks about making the transition to having another local company in LA do her casting for her. And I can't remember exactly which episode that is. Maybe you can look it up, Sharon.
Looking it up right now.
Awesome. Anyway, she has developed this really great relationship with her casting partner, who is also a small business and a maker business, and that she feels really good about being able to support them, and that doesn't detract from her ability to call her jewelry handmade. Related to that, I would recommend going back and listening to I think it was the first episode of YHB TV from this month, about working with a printer and developing a good relationship. Though all that stuff we talked about a little bit of very print specific things, but all the principles of developing that good relationship apply to finding manufacturing partners. So I would definitely go back and watch that and use that to inform the process for feeling people out like that.
Yeah, I think when people start to do this scaling up stuff, it can be very easy for people to pigeonhole their idea of growth. And we really encourage people to have creative solutions and think about different ways that scaling up and getting manufacturing partners involved looks like. And it doesn't necessarily have to be this completely scary, buying up front, hundreds of thousands of pieces. You don't have to necessarily like go that big. So, yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Another question from Dawn. So she is talking about asking about booth setups for trade shows. So the larger trade shows where shops are going to find stuff to buy for their shops. She says, I know it's going to be different than my regular booth setup, but how different will it be? Do you have any tips about making it easier for shop owners to make the choice to buy from me?
So tip is trade show boot camp.
yeah. Shameless plug for our friend Katie Hunt over at Trade Show Boot Camp. She is so knowledgeable about this stuff. And what is it? Tradeshowcamp.com. There we go.
Trade Show Camp. Yeah. So she runs something called Paper Camp, which obviously is stationary. And it's focused on getting people ready for National Stationery Show, but wholesale in general. I would highly recommend it if you are in the stationery world and thinking of doing trade shows. If you are in the gift world, a lot of that also applies. I believe Dawn is in yarn, so she's probably not in that. But even though you're not in that, she has so many resources on booth design at tradeshowcamp.com. I would go into the blogs. I would just scour her site for everything. She has so many great insights into wholesale that are, relevant to anyone who is doing it. It's not just anyone who is, within paper too. Mm-hmm. So,
I was going to add that I was listening to one of her podcast episodes recently where she actually said that she's noticed a trend in her paper camp participants, because I think that's all online. It's an online course, that
She does. There's a live
Oh, that's
paper
right.
camp, and then there's an e-course.
So she said that her attendees are skewing away from paper-specific businesses, and she's actually helping a lot of other product-based businesses. So I think there's tons of resources that she has to offer there. The other thing I was going to add, when you're dealing with trade shows, and this is definitely the case when you're doing like National Stationery Show or New York Gift or like any of the big gift shows, they will have very specific requirements and or guidelines for booths, and you want to read all of that down to the letter, as far as how tall you can build or what materials you can build out of. And some of them will,
you need people to help you do this
exactly stuff. Yeah, some of them mandate having labor
there
done
are fire marshals that will shut you down real quick.
So you've got to be really, really careful to make sure that you're hitting all those requirements. It's not nearly as flexible as setting up a craft show booth, where you can just bring your table and your tablecloth and maybe some soft walls or something. I was also going to recommend, I have some friends based in Ohio, they're designers. Their company is called These Are Things, and they do all kinds of different stuff, but they did a blog. I'm sorry, I'm trying to look it up now. I don't know if their blog still exists. They did a very detailed blog series a couple years ago when they first went to the National Stationery Show in New York, and like all the behind the scenes, they detailed how much it cost them, really, really in depth. But I might have just overpromised because I don't see their blog anymore. I'm going to see if I can dig that up. And if I can, I will post it in our Facebook group as a resource for people.
I was going to mention, speaking of designers, so Chris and Andy of Chris and Andy Design, they are big into helping people with trade show stuff, like getting people ready for that. Everything from catalogs to line sheets to booth design. I think she might have written something for us about it. Either way, Andy is in our Facebook group as well too, and has mentioned that too. But you could also just hit her up and ask her like what sort of resources she offers as well too.
Absolutely.
That is all right. I got too many windows open here to know what's going on. The next, yes, Rachel.
Yeah.
So Rachel asked how to prepare for hiring. How do you even afford to hire someone? When is it time to move your business out of your home?
Oh, just little questions.
Again, it goes a little bit along with the one that we just said with Beth asking about the handmade and the manufacturing and stuff like that. We suggest really like nailing down your pricing as well too, and making sure your business is super tight. So Jumpstart Your Handmade Business is something we'd recommend for that, as well as considering our mastermind program as well too for that. These are definitely things we discussed when we had our online summit last year in our mastermind. So that said, outside of getting pricing, having that all down, again, I would say creative solutions to really think about what makes sense. Obviously there is the whole idea where when you offload things that you were doing and give it to someone else, because they are focused on just that task, and you, because you have a million hats, they can usually get that done quicker. And so that can free actually up, say you're paying someone, to do 5 hours worth of work this week. And that doesn't even seem like that to you. But because you're you in your business, you are probably taking 10 or 15 hours to do those tasks. I promise you. So I would just think about like, what is a thing that I can just offload and like in a container of a task, give to someone else. And I would think about the easiest ways to do that in your business and what's sort of like bogging you down. So both of that, like what's bogging me down and what is something that I can easily put in this box and give to somebody else. And a lot of times that is probably going to look like hiring a VA, honestly. And so when you're hiring someone like that, they're not working in your home with you necessarily. They're working offsite, and that can just start to free up a lot of your time to grow the business, do other things like that. Moving out of your home is the other part of this. Oh, do you want to add anything to that, Isaac? The hiring.
I would love to. I was going to comment on the affording to hire someone. I think
Yes,
you have to have your pricing down. I think it's
you also should have your pricing included already to pay someone to do that labor.
Right. So you should be paying essentially accounting for paying yourself to do the work. So if depending on what you're hiring for, if you're hiring somebody to help you do the work, that should be built into your pricing already. And so then you can just divert that money over to them. The other thing that you should be at a point where you are profiting from your maker business. And if you are doing that, then you can decide, okay, what is my total annual profit? How much on average do I expect to spend? Can I divert this much over to somebody else? Will this allow me to focus on gaining more sales? Things like that. I'm going through something similar personally, where I've been thinking about hiring someone to help me with various things, and it's a little bit more than just a virtual assistant. But I have to look at, okay, I'm basically giving up some of my income to pay somebody else to do this. And so, a lot of VAs will do, like a guaranteed 5 hours a month or 10 hours a month or whatever that is at their hourly rate. And so you can work with that to say, okay, well, I can afford this, just like I would budget for, X amount a month for, tool rental or for any other kind of business expense. You account that as a business expense and work it into your finances that way. Those are just some thoughts on hiring.
Yeah. And when is it time to move out of your home? Well, I think this is difficult because obviously lots of different businesses take up different footprints in our homes. If you're running a stationary business, you probably don't have the same footprint as somebody who's running a candle business, or somebody who's running, who has a sewing-based business. That what they're going to need and use is going to be a lot different than what you're doing. So I think moving out of your home also looks like manufacturing a little bit. We talked about this with Stacia Guzzo in our mastermind last year. Was it mastermind? I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because she had a big move out of her house. I think there has to be both a obvious. If you are sort of at max capacity space wise, but you are feeling way out of league in terms of money and being able to move out, I think that's an indicator that you should really go back to some of the fundamentals in your business. If not, I think it's going to be an obvious you're in such a stressed position where the business isn't able to function properly because of it. Like it's no longer serving you and it's not able to do its purposes well. That, balls are dropping or things are messed up because space becomes an issue.
Mm-hmm. I think so the big challenge with moving out of your home is that you are increasing your expenses dramatically because you are leasing or renting a space, whether it's a studio in a building or an actual like full-on building or whatever. You then have utilities to pay on that. It's like, in some ways it's like adding, an apartment rental to your business expenses. So you might consider, especially if you own your own home, creative solutions like building a storage shed to store your inventory, or finding, maybe you get a used caravan off of Craigslist and that becomes your office or something. Like there are some ways that you can do that with one-time costs or limited costs that aren't going to result in $500 or $700 a month in rent, plus all the other expenses that go with it. And I think
I would say try to get creative as possible with that too. Like Isaac was saying, like, is it a thing where you can just like buy something that makes, a shed in your yard or something like that, where you, or, rent a room in a friend's house nearby or something, or some other kind of way, is it just renting a bigger storage unit, whatever it is, depending on your business, and trying to do that. Also, I think creatively to think like, is this a seasonal problem or is this an ongoing problem? If it's a seasonal problem where it's like, man, I can't keep doing this at the holidays, but the rest of the year, it's totally fine. I think that's something where, you might really want to consider how big of a leap that you're doing in that scale.
Yeah, for sure. I do think a storage unit is an easy expansion solution that doesn't require opening a studio or an office or anything like that. Okay, so quick pause to say that if anybody watching has questions of their own, something you're itching to know or something you're really struggling with, now is the time to pop over to the Ask a Question button and add those questions in there so we can address them. Okay, so our last question, and this comes from Eliza Jane, also through our Facebook group. She says, how do I hold on to my handmade brand while also expanding beyond handmade? How's that for a loaded question? I think, so before I get into some of my thoughts on that, I really appreciate that all of the questions that we've had are centered around this notion of major transition points in a business, either growth or a shift in focus from retail to wholesale, or kind of leveling up and establishing yourself, whether it's growing out of your space or growing out of being able to do everything yourself. So I think that I hope that at least emphasizes that you are not alone in this, that there are people all over the place, makers just like you, who are going through similar things. And these are not uncommon questions either. These are the hard things that a lot of people go through, that there's no easy, fast answer. Like, we have lots of advice and we have lots of things to think about, but there's no set path for you to go down to achieve these things. So I just wanted to say that. I think as far as Eliza's question goes, how do I hold on to my handmade brand while also expanding beyond handmade? I dug into this a little bit with her, and she is, her brand is very much handmade in all of her story and messaging and things like that. But she acknowledges that she needs to grow beyond that from a manufacturing standpoint. And for me, from kind of a philosophical standpoint, it's kind of about the difference between a handmade business versus a maker business in certain ways. And there are definitely no hard and fast definitions over what is a maker, what is a handmade business owner, what is crafting. Like, it's all very nebulous and it's evolving over time. But I think,
you mean like how like Pizza Hut has artisan craft pizzas or whatever?
Yes, precisely. But I think that there's a possibility to transition into what most would probably consider a maker business, where you're still, embodying a lot of the principles of handmade, but you're not necessarily making all of the things by hand. And that kind of gets into like artisan realm, or maybe not in the traditional sense, but in the popular sense, or becoming more of a production artist or a designer who then has stuff made based on your designs, things like that. And I think that there are ways um, to outsource production in ways that still meet handmade requirements. And in fact, coming up next month in YHB TV, we will be talking with some folks who run a cut and sew operation here in Portland that do a lot of work for makers. But it is very much like, I've been to their facility. They employ seamstresses at a living wage, and they're they're not hand sewing, but they're, these are not robots that are making these things. And so these goods that they're making are very much handmade and hand finished.
I think one of the things to think about too with that is being upfront with your customer about the process and how it's made. And I think, the honesty, like we said, the terms can be kind of nebulous, how one person defines handmade. I feel like we've gotten into this a lot, especially when we had our handmade community that was, eligibility requirements to be part of it. And I think, at some point you're buying supplies that you did not make in most businesses. So there really is not a 100% handmade business usually. So I think it's just be upfront with what you have made and who is making it and how they're a part of your business. And I think that's the thing that sells people on the product and anyways too. And I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of or anything like that. Obviously, I think if you're more of an artist, designer, maker, and you feel like you want to charge more for certain things that you've done, and then there's other stuff that are, production pieces that aren't as special in that sense where they've, had you be part of it, I think that's fine. I think it doesn't take away from you still being involved in the process of those pieces, just at a different level too. I think people still are interested in you as the brain behind whatever is being made. And they're there because you have that eye. So it doesn't necessarily mean that just because, if you're the person who has those exacting standards to say, yes, this lives up to my name and name brand, that's I think what's most important, and that you're honest about the process that went to it. I know that I think Eliza Jane has a business where it was like called Handmade on Main Street or something like that. So obviously that's a little bit problematic, which I think is always a good thing to think about, like having a name that you can grow into, even if you can't totally foresee the future and think, I'm going to make 100% of my stuff, the rest of my life. Thinking about a name that you can grow into can be a little bit more nebulous like that, I think is also smart too. So
these are great philosophical questions to get into as a maker.
Yeah. I think, people have discussed this, quite a bit online too. So kind of immersing yourself in that discussion and seeing where you fall. There's a lot of, disagreement on stuff. So it's okay that you don't agree with everyone, and no one's going to come to a 100% consensus on this.
Yeah. I think my last thing is that you might do a little exercise of kind of writing down your core values as a business owner right now, and what it is you value about the story you're telling and the products that you're making, and then look at what you're envisioning for yourself in the future and see if those future core values align, or maybe there's some that align more than others, And that might help you draw some connections between that storytelling process and figure out how that evolves. And I think, like Sharon was saying, the customers tend to be forgiving. I mean, especially when it comes to personal businesses like this, the evolution that a business owner goes through, especially for fans and repeat customers that really appreciate your work, they're gonna get it. They're gonna understand, and they're gonna support you as you go through it. So making changes like that is not the end of the world in the majority of cases.
Yeah, totally. I think that's it for questions. We didn't wind up getting any other ones. So if you have them, definitely go into the Facebook group and ask us. Let us know. We're probably not going to be able to come back here and get to them. If you missed any other of our other YHBTVs, all of the replays are up. So go ahead and do that. All of March is going to be done here pretty soon after we get done with this. But we do have April ready to go already. So you can sign up for the April YHBTV in the call to action button. It says April YHBTV, so you guys should get on that.
You do need to register in order to watch them because we only do 1 month at a time.
Yes.
And then the other thing you should also register for is our upcoming State of Making Summit.
To put that in the...
So the State of Making is an annual summit that we've done since 2016, where we bring on a whole bunch of guests and we do 6 different sessions on various topics that relate to handmade business owners. We look back at the year in that topic and what changed, what's going on, how does that affect the handmade community. We talk about what's coming up in the future, and it's always a lot of fun. This time around, we're condensing it into 2 back-to-back days. And we have got a great lineup in the works. We'll be announcing that and all the other details soon, but you can go ahead and get your free registration going there whenever you want. The link's right there. Check it out.
Yep, we are previewing it just for you guys right now. So we have not released all of the details, but you can go ahead and start signing up now.
Mm-hmm.
It's exciting. So, all right, you guys, this was fun. We will see you back next month. You got to register. Yeah.
Next week, new and different. We're going to be live from Craftcation if the internet gods shine down on us in favor.
Let us hope that hotel Wi-Fi comes through.
I'm really looking forward to it. We're going to have some fun.
Yep, it's exciting. All right. You guys all have a great week.
Bye.